It's deck days at Lowe's, and the savings are stacked. Right now, pros get 15% off all in-stock composite decking from top brands like Trex, TimberTech, and Decorators. Plus, get a free DeWalt 20-volt max 5-amp-hour battery when you buy a select DeWalt tool. The deck's stacked in your favor with brands pros trust. Our best lineup is here at Lowe's. Valid through 4/22 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
Versus the right. Entertaining and informative. On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Good afternoon, and hope you're having a happy Saturday afternoon. I'm David Paterson, and we are here with Jake Novak, and we are supposed to be having left versus right. But today is the kind of day where there are so many things going on, it's really hard to categorize people. And one of the issues that we're going to talk about, I guess we might as well jump right into it, Jake, is the issue of the police officer and the death of the individual who was it a cooler?
Yeah,
he threw a cooler at him,
drinks, yeah.
And the cooler hit his motorcycle, separated him. He then hits a fence and then falls back on the concrete on his head and, unfortunately passed away. However, apparently the motorcycle was going at a speed where he probably couldn't have stopped, and he was probably high. He just sold $20 worth of cocaine to somebody, and he very easily could have mowed those people down. I couldn't believe that at the end of the trial, the prosecutor said, I hope this serves as I don't know if he said warning, but it kind of like an example to other police officers as to how they should act in a split-second situation. And this was like, I don't know, 48 hours ago that this happened, but I can't get over it.
Yeah, let's get into the specifics of it a little bit. We've been talking about it a lot here on WABC the last couple of days. This is Eric Duran, the former NYPD sergeant, sentenced to 3 to 9 years by Judge Guy Mitchell, a de Blasio appointee, by the way. Governor, there are so many things to unwrap about this verdict that are ludicrous, but let's start with what you just said. Yeah, let's just start with what you just said. How is it going to serve as an example? Now, I know people might think, listening out there, especially those of you who are listening on the app, maybe far away from New York, who think that drug dealers speeding on motorcycles are crashing towards cops all the time in the city. Believe it or not, that's not always happening. It's an incredibly unusual situation. Also, picnic coolers are not really a popular deadly weapon these days. They're not the new Shiv.
I looked it up. They're not in the top 10.
They're not in the top 10. I mean, I know the picnic cooler gun control group is really upset at the PRA, Picnic Cooler Rifle Association. I mean, look, this is the most unusual freaking case I've ever heard in my life involving a cop and a fatality. Speeding motorcycle, picnic cooler as a deadly weapon, the whole thing. So the most ludicrous thing to say is like, well, I hope this serves it. You'll never do that again. I got news for you. Law or no law, verdict or no verdict, sentence or no verdict. This ain't never going to happen again. Okay, I use the double negative. I know I use a double negative and ain't isn't a word, but that's just because it's just that unusual.
It's true, though, the combination of incidents. First of all, he missed the guy. He hit the motorcycle. Then the motorcycle is now disabled, and it runs him right into a fence. When he bounces off the fence, his head hits the concrete. And those three incidents, or those three reactions, which, let's say we got some other people to do it with helmets and that kind of thing, they probably couldn't duplicate it.
Yeah.
In other words, we'd have somebody ride by with a big helmet on.
Never in a million years.
We smash him into a wall. He falls on the ground. He gets up and has a beer.
This is what you do AI for, because they can run 1 million simulations, and it would probably take 1 billion simulations on AI to make this happen again. And the judge, I think, it was ludicrous in his reasoning. He said, well, the officer, Eric Duran, ex-officer, said that he was trying to stop this motorcyclist from hitting the other officers, maybe hitting some other people. And the judge says, no. I don't believe that you were acting out of anger and frustration. Well, again, if this were a cop who was standing over someone with a revolver, I got news for you. I don't care how good a marksman you are, a markswoman you are. Hitting someone with a handgun is really hard. It's not easy. It's one of the reasons why I prefer a shotgun. You don't have to have such great aim. Even the governor could probably nail me with a shotgun. No problem there.
A few people with a shotgun.
So honestly, and usually when you cock the shotgun, that's usually enough. You never actually have to fire it, so that's great. Handgun, it's not easy. And so if someone hits you with a handgun, it was service revolver, that kind of thing, even a cop who's been on the range a lot, then I think you can prove intent and prove anger a lot more.
Exactly.
A picnic cooler, I mean, it's like that old joke, I've never shot a gun in anger. Have you ever thrown a picnic cooler in anger? I mean, how did the judge determine that? Were there many other cases? You're a lawyer, Governor. Are there many other case law examples of picnic coolers in anger? I mean, no. This was in the line of duty. The idea that there was malice of forethought here, in the split second he decided to pick up the cooler? I mean, how did he even know there was anything in it when he picked it up? He got it, I guess, when he picked it up and felt it was heavy, but still, honestly, there are so many ludicrous levels to this, and then the last ludicrous level is 3 to 9 years for this kind of a thing. I mean, this wasn't Abner Louima or Eleanor Bumpers. This was a guy who was fleeing from the scene in a dangerous vehicular situation, a motorcycle. So bad.
I have to personalize this for a second, Jake. I was around for Abner Louima. I was a little after Eleanor Bumpers. I was still in law school then.
You're impressed I pulled that name out.
Yeah, that was good. And the thing is, I always knew, regardless of how I felt about these particular cases, one day there's going to be a case like in reverse.
Yeah.
And am I going to have the balls to take the right position, which is what I feel I've done in this case and others before that. But we are so politicized now, it wouldn't even matter. There's going to be an appeal. There are going to be appeals judges. I would hope that if there are 2 or 3 of them, that they will come to the conclusion that this was, strangely enough, an accident of involving a person who was in the process of committing a felony because he just sold the cocaine. And, sometimes, not every time, but sometimes it's nobody's fault. It just happened. And he did what he was supposed to do. He was trying to stop him.
Considering that we're talking about human beings here, and in the case of the police, we're talking about armed human beings who have guns, have tasers. The fact, and I'm not trying to whistle past the graveyard here, but the fact that we have so few fatal incidents involving our cops in a big city like this, considering the number, is really a great testament to the police force here. I say the same thing about the U.S. right now in the war in Iran. I mean, they're thinking that maybe there's 3,000 total dead after this carpet bombing for 6 weeks, and it's so far really not any civilians that we can really count necessarily other than that school, and we still don't know all the details about that. The amount of restraint is something that I don't think this judge gets to understand. And you said something also interesting. You used the term split second. I'm not trying to denigrate being judge as a profession, being a judge, but I don't think that there's anything a judge does in his or her professional career as a judge that's split second. I mean, even if you're having a hard time deciding on an objection, you get to call timeout. You can call a sidebar. You can go to chambers. I mean, is there any split second decision a judge ever has to make? You can tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think so.
Maybe if he hears the building's on fire. That's about it.
Yeah, right. The courtroom is on fire. But as far as their judgments, and that's the way we want it. We don't want judges making legal decisions in a split second. But we do want police making decisions in split seconds because that's the way it is. And I don't think that you're right. I mean, I'll be on the other side from the right. All this defending of cops, I'm wondering, will I have the guts on the day, or as you said, the balls? Will I have the balls on the day when a cop really does commit an act that goes too far? Well, the answer was yes. And when the Abner Louima thing happened, it was obvious that the cops there in this situation were upset about getting slugged in the face. It turned out the person who slugged them in the face was not Abner Louima.
Abner Louima, right?
But that was clear. That was an act of revenge and anger. And if you can remember all the way back to 97, 98 when it happened, I think it was 97. There was actually a lot of unity in the city about it. I really don't remember a lot of people basically pushing the cops there and promoting and saying the cops were justified in doing what they're doing. I don't remember anyone saying that.
It was a dialed down reaction from maybe what had happened 10 or 12 years earlier with some of the incidents in the 80s. The first police incident that it certainly appeared to be racialized occurred in 1965 when this kid named James Powell, he's 15 years old, and he somehow had one of the hoses that they used to, water down the streets, and he was spraying people with the hoses, and the police were chasing him, and this police officer named Thomas Gilligan shot him in the back.
Yeah.
And then when he's lying on the ground, Gilligan walks over and kicks, I don't know why I'm kicking, no one can see it, but kicked his body over to see if he was still alive. And that's what ignited the Harlem riots, which went on, for like 2 weeks. And even President Johnson was asked to speak to try to calm people down, and he couldn't do it because there were a lot of these types of incidents that people had felt, and it got boiled into this one incident that, in a sense, it lined everybody up on the same side.
Now, the Watts riots in L.A. were also 65. Were they before or after this Gilligan incident?
I think they were after.
Oh, okay.
I think they were after.
Interesting. Okay. Because these things tend to snowball from city to city.
Yeah.
Right?
No, by the way, for full disclosure, and I can't remember who it was, but somebody came in to my office in Harlem as in the state Senate, and they started talking about how they'd been attacked by the police and this, that, and the other thing. And we think this is another case, we're carrying on, blah, blah, blah. And the guy told us his mother is inconsolable, blah, blah, blah. We called up his mother. She didn't even know what happened. He made the whole thing up.
Oh, my God.
And we were 2 hours from a press conference.
Oh, no.
And I'm going to tell you, the Lord up above must have just saved me from looking like the biggest jerk in the state if I had gone through with that, and then any research would have found that it was a false pretense.
Yeah, this was just such an odd case. Again, a gun wasn't used. A weapon really wasn't used, an improvised, roadblock. Really, it's. I'm sure. I wonder what I wonder if the defense said, hey. And I'm sure they did. Hey, if he really had this intent, he would have used his service revolver. Well, they don't have revolvers anymore. I think they have 9mm. But and on down the line. It's an egregious sentence, and we're not telling anyone to do anything about it. But it's important that for these people who make these decisions, this was Judge Guy Mitchell. I was talking to Sid Rosenberg about this on Friday, and he wholeheartedly agreed because we were working on the show together. You have to name these judges when they make these decisions, good and bad, and there's plenty of good ones too. But honestly, this is, I think, an egregious thing. It should never have been a conviction. If the judge was going to get involved, they should have overturned the conviction, although I think this was always a bench trial. I think it was a bench trial in addition to, obviously, a bench sentence.
Well, apparently the officer's attorney chose a bench trial because he thought that this was going to be a difficult case to reconcile. He needed somebody that maybe had more than just, what the average juror would know about things, and but that was the ruling. It's very surprising.
Yeah. I don't want to play the psychiatrist because I can't honestly know exactly what the judge was thinking, but I can read his decision and what I read. What?
I think you'd be a great psychiatrist.
Yeah. Well, I want to charge $7,500 an hour, and I want to get one of those white noise machines and old magazines in the waiting room. But honestly, I can read his decision, and what I did read of the decision, he really did. He played the psychiatrist. He decided he could understand the emotions and the intent of an officer. And I think that was just incredibly wrong. And again, I think if this judge wanted to get involved, he should have overturned. He should. Well, it wasn't a verdict for him to overturn because it was a bench trial, but he should not have convicted. And he should have, I think, also said that what the NYPD, he could have played both sides. He could have said the NYPD needs more training in these split-second issues, how they deal with people on mopeds and bikes, because we're seeing so much more of that, especially with a lot of the migrant delivery people in the city, and then e-bikes and things like that. He could have done that, but I'm going to play a little bit of the psychiatrist a little bit in just simply from reading his decision. Look, when judges do this and when politicians do this, some of them think this is it. this is how I'm going to help the poor in the city. I'm going to be lighter on them crime-wise. And again, they couldn't be more wrong.
It never works.
It's always the poor who will be the victims. That guy would have run over other poor people. I mean, he would have gone on to do more drug dealing. It hurts the poor to be soft on crime. The poor are the first. We talk about this every time we do a show together, Governor. The poor are always the first and usually the only real enduring victims of crime. So, so if you really want to help the poor, put away the people who are victimizing them. And
by the way, that's why people who live in poor neighborhoods, when they are polled, are very strong on crime prevention, because either something happened to their cousin or a neighbor from down the street. The incidents are far greater. And that's why Mamdani has got to change his whole attitude about Commissioner Tish's attempt to move police encampments, we'll call them, to the areas where the crime is higher. So, if you want to arrest a lawyer, where do you go? To his office. If you want to beat up a doctor, where do you go? To his office. Yeah. If you want to catch criminals, where do you go? To the places where they commit them. Yeah. And I hope the mayor will change his mind about that, because I thought it was a brilliant idea.
Yeah. The idea that having a police chopper overhead or cops in your line of vision all day is sad. No, that's a byproduct of another of the real sad fact, which is that there's a lot of crime. Seeing the cop isn't the crime. It's the crime that brought the cop to your neighborhood in the first place. That's the sad part, not this idea that, the cops are here all the time and they make me feel uncomfortable. Bill Clinton, when he was president, was pushing that community policing idea, and it got bastardized by a bunch of groups here and there. I don't want to get into some of the problems with that, but it was a good idea. The idea that the police should be a part of the community, should be making friends there. It was the exact opposite of what had happened with the Rodney King riots, which of course happened the year before Bill Clinton became president. Or not the year before, that year. It was 92, right? Because Daryl Gates and the LAPD ran that department like it was an army, and like the places they were patrolling was like going out on patrol in Vietnam. There was a point in time in LA in the early 80s where like 70% of the cops were Vietnam veterans. And they were and they were being trained in that same way. So I was all for, even as a conservative, looking at this idea of community policing so that they would be more well known. And then of course you have to worry about corruption. Yeah, you got to worry about corruption there. But as I've written many times in many editorials, we know how to stop gun crime. We know how to stop crime, period. You get more cops on the street and you go after the people. You don't go after the guns. You go after the people most likely to have the illegal guns. And there were two presidents who did that, Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, who both put aside extra money to do it. George W. Bush was specifically going after guns that way, but not going after guns. He was going after gun criminals. It's just amazing. The guns don't get up and walk on their own. And so I like the idea. Again, how it was implemented in every case wasn't always great. But when you had a Democrat president, and I was there on the White House lawn that day in 1993, when 1994, where he announced this huge amount of money that was going to police departments across the country. And I thought to myself, there goes another issue for the Republicans. They stole it from us again. And then you had Barack Obama give it right back to the Republicans. You had law and order taken away from the Republicans by Bill Clinton.
Wow.
And they blew it.
But we're going to take a little break, Jake, a little, alliteration poetry there. Yes. And when we come back, I have a surprise for you. And the surprise is, I'm going to tell you about the time that I was stopped by the police. We're on WABC 77, and he's Jake Novak, and I'm David Paterson. I have trouble with that sometimes. We'll be back right after this.
The left versus the right on the Red Apple Podcast Network. Versus the right. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We're back on the left versus the right, and I am going to keep my promise. Jake, you listen to radio and people tell you what they're going to do after the commercial. Then after the commercial, they go in a totally different area. But my situation was that someone was waiting for me in my office, and I thought they were coming to my apartment. So I've got to get down to the office. And as one of those nights, it's hard to get a taxi. It's raining. I'm 10 blocks away, so I'm running to the office. This cop jumps out and stops me, and he says, "Look, I don't want to break your balls, but what are you running down the street for?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to meet someone." And see, I kind of know that I could tell him something, but I'm just going to play it out, Yeah. So he says, "Well, can I frisk you?" I said, "Sure." He frisked me, and he says, "Do you have any money on you?" I said, "No." I said, "That's why I think you should drive me to my office." And then I told him the story, and he did it. He did
great.
it.
That's a good story.
So my one police stoppage was very positive. He
asked you. He asked you.
Yeah, he was.
This is reminding me now of that famous incident with Henry Louis Gates Jr. In Cambridge. I think it was the first year of Obama's presidency, and Henry Gates locks himself out of his house in Cambridge, and he's trying to break into his house, and the cop approached him, and Gates curses him out. I mean, Gates really verbally assaulted him. The cop then ends up arresting him. And then President Obama is going to weigh in on it. And that was very early in his presidency, and I naively thought, oh, he's gonna pour some cold water on this and basically say this was just a misunderstanding. Instead, the president of the United States goes on national television to say that the cop acted stupidly. I don't know about you, but if I'm living in a neighborhood, white or black, someone's trying to break into a house, and then the cop asks him about it and curses out the cop, I want that guy to get arrested. I'm sorry, I want him arrested. This is someone who's showing no respect for the officer. Who knows what's going to happen next? And then they had the beer summit. Remember, they all three of them sat down.
Oh, that's right. It was him,
Gates, the cop, and Obama, I think, also sat down.
Right.
And, to me, this was a if I were Gates, I would have been the one who should be embarrassed. First of all, you should be embarrassed that you locked yourself out of the house and didn't have someone to call and get you in.
Well, no, I resemble that.
Yeah.
I've locked myself out a number of times.
But and that's my fault. But then to break in and then to yell and to curse out the cop, who clearly was not an aggressive. This guy was a cop in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He's probably to the left of Mao. I mean, come on, really. You want to believe that he's like, what was the name of that sheriff that sued the New York Times? Sullivan, right?
Sullivan, right?
Yeah. I mean, do you think he was Sheriff Sullivan or the guy or Rod Steiger's character from In the Heat of the Night? I mean, give me a break. It wasn't that. And that to me epitomized Obama's whole presidency. What could have been a tremendous gift to the world for him to say, like, look, we still have tremendous racism in this country. We've got all these other problems, but I'm here to say, obviously, things can be achieved in this country, whatever your skin. And we're going to now tone down this whole we can't succeed in America.
And you know what? From the very beginning, he could have said it was a mistake, but it looked to the officers like he was breaking into a place. And when they stopped him, I have told him, when you get stopped by the police, even if you're not doing anything wrong, hear them out. Why didn't you just explain it to them? Yeah. And he didn't do that.
I'm a white guy who's been pulled over before.
You are?
Yeah, who's been pulled over.
I've been doing this show with you for a month.
I'm a white guy. I have white skin. Now, this is whole argument about whether or not Jews are white or not. It's like, whatever. It's like, it reminds me of the old Sammy Davis Jr. joke about he's going golfing. Someone asked him what his handicap is. I'm a one-eyed black Jew. I need another handicap.
So
I don't know. If white is a bad thing, then I guess Jews are white now because they're always giving us a handicap. But I remember very early in my driving life, I don't know, not long after I got my license, I used my turn signal because I literally do a turn signal when I'm walking. I flip the thing. I have this reaction in my mind when I'm moving, and the cop said I didn't have my turn signal on, and it was probably because he didn't see it, and I was like, I didn't even argue. I was like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, there we go.
And he didn't give me a ticket. But the thing is that I was scared out of my mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I wasn't going to fight with the guy, even though I know I was right. I know I did use my turn signal.
Now, by the way, Jake, since you brought it up, I was born in Brooklyn. And when I was school age, I don't know if I had told you this before, that the New York City public school system wouldn't take me in the public school. They had these little, clinics, I guess, for handicapped students and that sort of thing.
No, you didn't tell me that.
My mother hit the ceiling, particularly her, and she goes out. She goes to Westchester. She goes to Rockland County. She went to all these places, and then, ironically, a friend of hers who just gotten married said, I'm living in Hempstead, Long Island now, and I went to register my son, and I kind of told him about you and your son, and they said, why don't you come out here and talk to them. Maybe you could work something out. And they did work something out. So I actually became the first disabled person to go to public school in Long Island.
Wow.
When I went there, this was not a great time to be black in this district that I was in. But the students who were immediately invited me over and that kind of thing. There were 4 of them. I know where all of them are now. Were all Jewish. They were all Jewish. And that's why when I was older, like in my 20s, and then there were these, cries of anti-Semitism and then a reaction and that kind of thing. But I remember that time, and you just don't forget that there are some people who they can meet anybody. They don't look at color, and they don't care about what your practice. And that was how I started out.
Yeah, that's a great story. We go off on another tangent because I do like to bring up her memory. I have the daughter of one of my first cousins who sadly passed away in her early 30s to cancer. It's a really sad story. Died last year or 2 years ago. She started something, promoted something. She wasn't the starter of it, but she absolutely was the promoter of it in her school, in her public school in Los Angeles. It's called Circle of Friends. Now, as you know, they've mainstreamed a lot of kids with disabilities, kids with handicaps, whatever you want to call it. But what this group figured out was they put you in the classroom together, but when it's lunchtime and recess time, they don't play with you. They're not on and so Circle of Friends makes sure that everyone sits together. It's this inclusivity type of thing in real life. I mean, it's one thing, we say inclusivity as adults all the time, and we think we're being great because we now have a wheelchair access for people at work. Big deal. Try being a preteen in 7th and 8th grade and sitting with the kid who's developmentally disabled. That's a different kind of, that's a level of inclusivity that really is saintly. And I was just always so impressed because she ended up making that her life's work. She went to college and introduced that in the local public schools where she went to college outside of Los Angeles.
And she was in her 30s.
Yeah, she died of cancer recently.
Oh, that's sad.
But Circle of Friends is, you can look it up online, Circle of Friends. It's amazing because it takes that extra step. It's one thing to have a class with the other kids. It's another to feel like you can actually have something, you actually have them, you actually have a friend. You have more than just someone who was sitting next to you in a classroom. So sorry to go off on that tangent, but I'm sure everyone appreciated it.
Well, that's a tremendous contribution that she made while in the time she was here, and people twice their age still haven't done anything meaningful.
Yeah, her name was Danielle Meyer, by the way, and we all miss her. But.
So now we do have, in addition to what's going on, we do have something going on in Iran. I don't know if it's a war. I don't know if it's an ultimatum. From day to day, you really don't know what's happening. And I'm starting to get the feeling because yesterday there was some polling data about investors who are just like pulling back right now, waiting to see what happens. And it's hurting the market. And if it hurts the market, then it's going to inevitably hurt people. And when the president issued the ultimatum for 8 o'clock, which would have been last Tuesday night,
right.
What I thought was, I didn't think he was going to, try to blow up the civilization of Iran, these things that he said.
Yeah.
But I did think he was going to do something that was just enough to scare them and then make an offer to them that they might accept. Maybe he did that, and they refused. But it's starting to go on to to kind of to a point where I think even people on both sides want to see some kind of just some kind of treaty or meeting of the minds. And I just wanted to put that out there, see what you think.
Yeah. Well, the operative words for me, since he became president, and even since he started running for president in 2015, the two words you really need to remember with Donald Trump are just wait. That's whether you hate him or you love him. Just wait. It astounds me that, especially the people who hate Donald Trump, and it's even worse for the people who say they like him, that there are still a good percentage of people who get paid to do what we do, to be pundits, to talk about news, to talk about things, who jump immediately on when Donald Trump does something and think that they know what's going on. I think that they know what the end game is. I don't know exactly what precipitated this pause. I really don't know. I don't know if it's going to hold. I do know where Iran is right now, which is very, very weakened. There's a lot of confusion. You've had 2, 3, 4 levels of leadership gone. I do believe that some of the people left are very, very radical as well. But they don't have really the ability to lead so much. So that might be leading them to a negotiating table. I'm going to just wait. Now, do I hope for the Iranian people to be more free, and I hope that they don't get slaughtered in this interim 2-week period? I hope that the besieged forces don't get stronger and go after them. But at the same time, we need to see what's going on here. I'm not comfortable with the United States carpet bombing anywhere. The other thing to remember is regime change is hard. Someone told me the other day, well, there's never been a successful regime change. Of course, that's not true. And probably, forget about regime change, Governor. I think the greatest foreign policy success in the history of the United States is Japan. Japan is regime change, culture change, economic revitalization, you name it, and tremendous ally of the United States. And they're not always in our corner. They could have been in our corner a little bit more on this war in Iran, but in general. But let's not forget, it took 2 nuclear bombs dropped, by the way, on the infrastructure. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not really totally, as you could say, belligerent military targets. They were infrastructure targets. Right. Just like this was the threat. So, it took 2, and it also took a very brilliant military governorship by Douglas MacArthur, who for some reason couldn't be his own political strategist. But in every other thing, he was great. He was great. He understood politics really well, and he understood how to create a regime change there without executing. He was, by the way, he's the reason why the Emperor of Japan wasn't tried and executed, and we had plenty of evidence on him, by the way. If you think he was just out of it, you're wrong. But MacArthur understood that if we want to have a successful regime change here, we need him to be around. Keep
this guy around for a while.
Humiliate him. Which he did many times. There's a reason why they appeared in public together, because MacArthur was about a foot taller than he was, and he was wearing 1920s garb compared to MacArthur's very cool military attire, and on down the line. So we have done regime change, but regime change took 2, granted, low level, at the, considering what we have now, but 2 nuclear bombs dropped on those people for them to get the picture. I'd love to be able to get away with it without having to do that now, but maybe we need the governor to drop the equivalent of a nuclear bomb just on the leadership of Iran, which I think we've kind of done, maybe just one. Maybe we need to drop another one. Again, the equivalent of one. I'm not calling for nuking for real, just the equivalent of a nuke, which means every one of those leaders is obliterated, just like Nagasaki and Hiroshima were.
Well, I think that the president has made it clear that they kind of did that the first time. I mean, they really wiped out just on everyone except for the son of the Grand Poobah, whoever he was. And but you're right. I think if there was a second attack of that level, that the government might fall apart. And there still are a lot of citizens in Iran that would like to live in peace and would like to be part of the country rather than being subjugated. That's really a good suggestion.
Yeah, and I think that President Trump doesn't want. Obviously, we don't want to see what happened in Iraq happen in Iran, where a bunch of militias come in. But the funny thing about it is that was the work of Iran. So it may not actually be a threat as much as some people are worried. It may not be actually the biggest worry. But you do have different factions in Iran that could easily go to war with each other and create a balkanized, weaponized state with the Kurds and other groups like that moving into different regions. I don't think we want to see that. It seems to me like there's still a dream of some kind of coalition government that, some kind of form of the government is today that they have today, but more moderate in every way. I don't know if we can get there. I really don't. And I don't know if these peace talks are going to work. Although the delegation showed up. We were waiting early Friday Iran time by late Thursday night New York time. We did know that the delegation actually did show up in Pakistan, which is one of the reasons why we didn't have a tremendous going down in the markets on Friday. So, I mean, we didn't have a big rally either. But anyway, we'll see where this goes. But remember, the operative words with Donald Trump and his policies are just wait.
All right, Mr. Novak, we're going to just wait for another 2 minutes. And at that point, I want to ask you a question to kind of summarize what could be the best that could come out of this for the United States and what would be the worst thing we would want to happen. And I couldn't think of anyone better than you to answer the question because I couldn't think of anyone else who's in the room. Anyway, we'll be back. Jake Novak with David Paterson, the left versus the right, and whoever else.
The left versus the right on the Red Apple Podcast Network. Versus the right. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And as promised, we are back. And Jake has had a couple of minutes to think about how he thinks this all could go in the United States' favor, maybe some kind of, understanding. My feeling, just very quickly, is if you have an agreement with anybody that lives in Iran right now, I don't think the paint will dry. But the thought about how this could end admirably.
Well, people might think this is crazy because when you think about the Middle East right now, all you think of is war and horrible things. And then you saw the movie Lawrence of Arabia and you think of, they tried to have these post-conquering peace conferences or coalitions put together, and all ended so sadly. But actually, that Lawrence of Arabia type scenario wouldn't be so bad. The years between the end of World War I, which is the time period for Lawrence of Arabia, when they tried to get these Arab tribes together.
1918, 1919.
Yeah. They got all these Arab tribal leaders together, and they started to divvy up that map of, the British did, of the Middle East. And people, I think wrongfully, think that was the beginning of the problem. It was because they had these divided up lands. They created these countries like Transjordan. They had the British mandate, what they called Palestine, which is, of course, Israel. They had, Syria. I mean, they did all this. And that was no. What turned, and now they weren't going to be singing Kumbaya, and it wasn't going to be perfect. But what turned the Middle East into this modern war, terrorism powder keg were two things: the Nazis and crude oil. The Nazis had a tremendous influence on the early genocidal branches of Islam in the area. And so they started to turn what was a more peaceful region, wasn't completely peaceful, into much more of a dangerous region.
I'll tell you what, Jake, I've got to read more about that.
Yeah.
So the Nazis were right there, right after the ones that were still around during World War II, were actually manipulating what was going on in these countries that would 2,000 miles away from
Starting in the late 20s, the Nazis began a relationship, obviously before they took control of Germany. They didn't win that election until 1933. But in the late 1920s, the Nazis started a relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and also with al-Husseini, who was their guy in Jerusalem. And then by the time the Nazis did take power in 1933, they were pressuring the more moderate governments in the Arab world, including King Farouk in Egypt, who was very much in favor of a Jewish state in Israel. He wanted Jews to come in and help him administer his country. Well, he already had them in his cabinet. And the Nazis told King Farouk, if you don't stop with that nonsense, we're going to stop buying Egyptian cotton. And Germany was one of the top purchasers of Egyptian cotton, and that was the end of that. They encouraged the Hebron massacre, which was the first mass terrorism attack in what is now Israel against the Jews. Before that period, there had been a lot of peaceful coexistence between Arabs and Jews in that region. They built Israel together. That's why there were so many Arabs there, because they heard the Jews were there and hiring and building and treating them better than the Ottomans did. And on down the line. Now, again, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this was kumbaya type situation. But when you couple that with Roosevelt's deal with the Saudis at the end of World War II to make them a primary supplier of crude oil to the United States and to much of the Western world,
right, and
you got the money, and then at the same time you had this festering thing going on. After the war ended, after World War II ended, many Nazis did go to the Middle East. It was ex-Wehrmacht officers who trained Yasser Arafat. And they were and Nazi writings and Nazi propaganda remains to this day pretty popular in a lot of these Islamist circles. They sound like Nazis because that's who trained them. Again, not saying Islam doesn't have some very harsh words to say about non-Muslims in the Quran, etc. But guess what? Bible's got some pretty nasty things in it too. It all depends on how you act on it and how you interpret it. So the Nazi influence has a lot to do with this. My point is, it's a long answer, but if we convened all these groups, whether it's the Kurds, some of the Islamic groups, and Iranian exiles who want to come back and invest, along with the Shah, the son of the Shah, who's now the Shah in their mind, and try to figure out how to work together without a Nazi influence, without maybe that could actually work. I don't think, by the way, if you think that's too kumbaya or too Pollyannish, again, take a look at the history of the Middle East from 1919 until 1929. Not that bad. I'll take that in a second over what we've had over the last 40 years.
I'm going to take a look about it in the next hour, but I've got this question to you. Would you compare that kind of conduct to the infiltration of political parties by the DSA?
Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit in that way. The thing is, though, what the Nazis were looking to do was basically start fires everywhere. And I think that's where the similarity is. I think the DSA, what a lot of people don't understand about people like George Soros and this guy Neville Singham, who's putting a lot of money into DSA type stuff like that and paying for Nokia, people keep calling them leftists. They're not leftists. They want to destroy the United States. George Soros isn't a lefty any more than Archie Bunker is. He's not a lefty. He's looking to make a huge profit on a bet against the American economy. George Soros is a billionaire because he bet against the British pound and brought it down. He hasn't been successful that much with the United States with the dollar, but he's waiting. He's still working on that, and his sons, either wittingly or unwittingly, they're not leftists. Calling them leftists is to mix it up.
I actually know one of his sons, Jonathan.
Yeah, they're not leftists. They're not. And by the way, I see this all the time. I meet people who call themselves environmentalists. No, they just hate the oil companies and hate rich white men. If the oil company were run by somebody that they personally knew, they wouldn't have
that problem.
Yeah, I mean, every once in a while you meet a real environmentalist, like a guy like Patrick Moore, who was one of the founders of Greenpeace, who, because he's a true environmentalist and understands the
was serious about it.
Yeah, he's pro-nuclear power because he knows there's been incredible safety improvements in nuclear power, and he speaks out against these people who are just against everything and don't understand what real environmentalism is. So same thing here with like the DSA. I don't really think that they're leftists. I think that that's an insult to the great leftists of 100 years ago. I think that they're just they're spoiled. They want to destroy, and they're not looking to do anything. So that, in that sense, they do have something in common with the Nazis. But the infiltration of parties by outside groups who are really enemies of that kind, we haven't really seen that in this country. There certainly was a belief that was happening, and yes, there were a lot of communists in this country, even into the 1950s. McCarthy wasn't completely wrong. He wasn't completely, he wasn't all there right in the head, but he wasn't completely wrong. But it wasn't. Those people actually were misguided idealists, and some of them were compromised by the Soviets, and it's good that we don't have that problem.
And they really didn't have any apparatus to
They had no cash flow
or anything like that, right?
That's the difference. People say, like, how can little Iran be such a threat to us when the big Soviet Union in the 60s couldn't bring us down? Because the big Soviet Union in the 60s, 70s, and 80s didn't have that kind of a cash flow. The Iranians can put anyone on the payroll, and they do it through Qatar, and they've done it through a bunch of other groups. And now, of course, China has a huge cash flow also. Cash flow, folks, that's the big deal. And that, to me, is... And the Nazis had some cash flow, certainly after they got going, and they did provide the Muslim Brotherhood with money. So I guess there are some similarities. I don't know. I'm not afraid to make those kinds of comparisons, though, when they're apt. There's a lot of people who never want to compare anything to the Holocaust, which is ridiculous. It's a period in history. There's going to be some similarities here and there. That's all.
From time to time.
Yeah.
Would you think that that the Soviet Union has been diminished by the recent activities in the Middle East? I mean, they're not in the picture at all.
You mean Russia now?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, they have. I mean, Russia has been diminished by a lot of things. And you could say it's because they've had this problem in Ukraine, and you could say because they got really involved in Syria, and you could say Iran's falling, and all of that would be true, but you're missing the bigger picture, which is, and you can only say this in Yiddish, but I'll say it in English, but it's
Yiddish first.
You know, they're trying to dance at all the chasanas. Russia's trying to dance at all weddings.
Exactly.
Yeah, Russia's tried to dance at all weddings, and eventually, you know, and there's a lot of other sayings similar to this. Eventually, you can't have your feet in everyone's, you know, in every room, and they overextended themselves. You know, I took a course at Columbia. We're both Columbia undergrad graduates with a guy named Robert Legvold. It was called Soviet Foreign Policy, and I was lucky enough to take it in the fall of '91 when the Soviet Union was falling. And it was a heck of a time, and it was great to see my professor on Peter Jennings every night, almost. But what I found it fascinating was how incredibly expansive and ambitious the Soviet foreign policy was. They really believed. At first, it was like, well, let's get our fingers in a lot of pots so that people can't mess with us again. Remember, the Soviets lost 20 million freaking people in World War II. So they figured, let's build the Iron Curtain and let's push it out a little bit so that no one we really insulated. And then it turned into, let's try to dominate the whole world. Maybe we can push this even further. I was fascinated by that. And what's been really fascinating is that however diminished Russia is since the end of the Soviet Union, they still have that same foreign policy, and they have the same MO, which is fake news. You know, the fake news. Russia invented that before in the time of the czars. That predates the USSR. They love fake news. It's worked for them very well in Europe, and until recently, it didn't work here in the United States all that well. I'm starting to see some of it working. I mean, I think a lot of that has to do with what's going on with Tucker Carlson and some of these other people. I don't think Russia's the only group behind it, but that's Russian-style, czarist-style misinformation nonsense that you're hearing from the Candace Owens. And I was really happy that President Trump called them out on Thursday and really called them losers. So
I think
they're diminished, though. They're diminished because they overextended themselves, Governor.
If there's one time that he could have gotten 80% approval from the public, it was to say exactly what he said on Thursday.
Yeah.
Do you think I'm just, really wondering how we are going, meaning Americans, are going to address the aftermath if they can just bring some sort of end to this crisis?
Well, first of all, there's going to be this, bless you, Governor, there's going to be a major issue with the fact that we have an entrenched opposition in this country that is not going to accept any result here. They won't accept it. So a complete surrender by the Iranian regime, no matter how horrible it is, and angels coming from heaven coming to rule Iran in its place will still be opposed by Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, and MS Now. And that isn't even an exaggeration. I'm not even joking. They will absolutely oppose it. I just want to couch my answer by first saying that and understand. You have to understand there's this entrenched opposition right now that has no interest in learning from its mistakes. Unlike someone like, for example, Neville Chamberlain, who's considered this big joke in history, and he kind of is, but people forget the postscript. Now, Neville Chamberlain died of cancer not long after he stepped down as prime minister. But for those months after he stepped down, he had a little bit of a flirtation of pushing back against Churchill a little bit. But once the war started for real, Neville Chamberlain worked hard for the war effort. That should not be forgotten. I don't see Chuck Schumer or anybody else ever getting down and starting enrolling bandages or doing anything for any war effort. I don't think he'll ever do it. We're really in a bad place right now. But I think the best resolution would be for a split government in Iran. I would like to see some of the territories in Iran the Kurds should be given some autonomy, and other groups should be given their freedom. But I do think they're going to need something like a real military governor, not that chump that Bush put in Iraq. I forgot his name, the guy in the suit. Somebody more like Douglas MacArthur.
Yeah.
Should go in there and rule it with the iron. And the things that Douglas MacArthur shoved down the Japanese throats, including giving the votes to women, making them write a constitution. Sorry, that's one of the reasons why it's the best foreign policy probably ever in American history. We need a real strong hand there. Maybe send Tom Homan over there to run Iran. Honestly, that wouldn't actually be the worst idea.
Oh, he's got the personality for it.
Yeah.
He'd be great.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to ask for the indulgence of my audience while I ask Jake this question. Douglas MacArthur, Harry Truman, who was right?
Well, I am a huge, huge admirer and fan of Douglas MacArthur, but Harry Truman was right in that dispute. The military of the United States, no matter how right it is, and MacArthur was very right in his approach to what should have gone down at the end of the Korean War, doesn't matter. We have to have a civilian control of the military. Truman, in my opinion, was a great, great president. MacArthur was a great, great general. And when you have two great men in the room, you get the sum of all their fears. And sadly, it didn't end up being the greatest partnership as far as the results. But on the other hand, it was Truman who handed the reins of Korea over to MacArthur in the first place, and that's why we had the Incheon landing, which was an incredibly risky but masterful stroke that no other general would have had the guts to conceive, let alone carry out. So it actually wasn't a total loss. But again, I'm a huge Douglas MacArthur fan, but Harry Truman was absolutely right in that. And, I'm so happy to see the resurrection of Harry Truman. I think by the time I was born in 1970, he already was resurrected. But my father, who's, I'm happy to say, is still with us at 84, remembers how incredibly hated Harry Truman was by the establishment in this country, both the Republican and the Democrat. The New York news media, for example, hated Harry Truman and really went after him. And then I think by the time I was born, but certainly during my adulthood, you've seen his presidency and his reputation resurrected. You don't hear too many people saying bad stuff about Harry Truman these days.
It's interesting. Of course, he takes office in 1945 after Roosevelt passes away, gets reelected in 1948, could have run in 1952 because he didn't run.
Right. He was grandfathered out of it. Right. And he was allowed.
He's an interesting figure in history because I think there's a lot, as you point out, that was misunderstood about him.
Read David McCullough's books. Read them all, but read his Truman book. I was just thinking today, though, actually, I was just thinking about Truman today because Truman was given the opportunity to make a ton of money in his he lived a pretty decent amount of time after he left office.
He sure did.
He lived into the 60s. He was offered by a little-known company at the time called Toyota to be their front man. They never asked him to do an ad.
Yeah. Toyota. Is that a department store? Oh no, they're not around anymore.
And and this was like a deal. This was like this was the 60s. And they offered him like $2 million, which back then was like $200 million. And he didn't even have to do an ad for them. He just had to drive it and have it and own one. And he said no. And believe me, he could have used the money. He was never a wealthy man.
He's Jake Novak. I'm David Paterson. This was The Left versus the Right. We have some more programming for you at 4 o'clock, and it better be good. Jake and I are going to listen to it because if it isn't good, we're not going to give up the time at 4 o'clock next week. Enjoy the weekend, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to The Left versus the Right. You can hear The Left versus the Right Saturday afternoons at 4. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
The right window treatments change everything. Your sleep, your privacy, the way every room looks and feels. At Blinds.com, we've spent 30 years making it surprisingly simple to get exactly what your home needs. We've covered over 25 million windows and have 50,000 5-star reviews to prove we deliver. Whether you DIY it or want a pro to handle everything from measure to install, we have you covered. Real design professionals, free samples, zero pressure. Right now, get up to 40% off site-wide, plus get a free professional measure at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions apply.